At precisely 3:25 p.m. on August 27, 2021, the bustling city of Kunming was witness to a remarkable scene. Thousands of residents stood on their balconies, streets, and parks, eagerly clutching their cameras. Anticipation hung in the air as 3:30 approached. How loud would it be? Would the structures withstand the force, or would they crumble? The collective gaze was fixed on a cluster of 15 high-rise buildings, each 30 stories tall. These towers had remained unfinished for 7 years, a poignant symbol of a developer's bankruptcy. Radios echoed with a countdown. Then, at the stroke of 3:30, 4.8 tons of explosives transformed the towering structures into a weird dance, resembling candlesticks careening over sideways into, onto, and around each other. It was a spectacle seldom seen. Yet, this event is not an anomaly. Across China, the once booming construction industry that fueled the economic miracle is now losing momentum. Astonishingly, more than 20% of apartments across the country sit vacant. They are either undesirable or purchased by middle-class Chinese investors seeking the secure haven for their money, only to find their investments at risk. The decline is tangible. Property prices are reducing. Property developers are declaring bankruptcy due to overwhelming debt incurred during construction, and the population is dwindling. Even the birth rate is declining, leaving a surplus of unoccupied apartments. Interestingly, this situation is not exclusive to China. Neighboring countries have experienced similar downturns due to diverse factors. However, in China, the shift is happening rapidly. The question that looms large is, what sets China apart from the rest? In a twist of fate, a policy enacted in 1979 is now unraveling and impacting China in ways few foresaw, particularly among my generation who often find themselves without siblings. The once imposing one-child policy has run its course, and its aftermath is proving costly for China. Picture this: October 1979, a diverse group gathered in Beijing around a table. A Zimbabwean activist, 2 renowned novelists, the deputy director of the British Museum, the paramount leader of China, Deng Xiaoping, and, unexpectedly, David Attenborough, the iconic nature documentary personality. This assembly marked a fascinating episode of deception. Yes, that David Attenborough. In the same year, he launched his groundbreaking series, Life on Earth, laying the foundation for the nature documentaries he is now celebrated for. The production spanned 3 years and took him around the globe, but China proved a challenging destination. During that era, few foreigners were granted access. China preferred small, purposeful delegations over casual tourists. Attenborough, being a distinguished British figure, joined such a delegation. Alongside others, he explored Beijing and engaged in a televised discussion with the man steering the entire country. Interestingly, David Attenborough, always the environmental advocate, posed a question to Deng that Western media had never ventured to ask. His inquiry was straightforward. What was China's strategy to address population growth? Deng's response was equally direct, stating, "At present, we are encouraging married couples to have only one child, and material awards are given to those couples who only have one child." Here's a little side note. I stumbled upon this nugget by delving into an old transcript. Surprisingly, not many people realize that David Attenborough scored one of the journalistic coups of the decade, confirming China's introduction of the one-child policy. Goodbye. Now let's delve into the one-child policy itself. Why was it implemented? Rewind to 1970, when the average Chinese woman would give birth 6 times in her lifetime. Despite child mortality at 10, a tragic reality, most Chinese families still had 5 or 6 children. Recognizing this as a significant issue, Chinese authorities sought the expertise of one of their brightest minds, Song Jian. While renowned as a genius with the ability to tackle any problem quickly, Song Jian was no demographer. He was a rocket scientist. Quite the unexpected turn, right? The government tasked Song Jian with addressing the population challenge. Juggling this alongside his rocket science pursuits, he forecasted a staggering population of 4 billion within a century. However, Song Jian's prediction missed a crucial shift. Throughout the 1970s, Chinese fertility plummeted from 6 children per woman to 2.5, thanks to improved access to family planning and education. This trend mirrors global patterns. Educating girls and providing access to contraception and abortions tends to reduce birth rates. As is the style of the Chinese Communist Party, they meticulously monitored adherence to these rules. Penalties for exceeding the mandated child limit, especially in urban areas, were severe. Work permits were withheld, and securing housing became an arduous task. Every city neighborhood featured a family planning clinic, where the state meticulously documented the breeding potential and practices of all residents, tracking who underwent sterilization, who opted for contraception, and who pledged to limit their family size. In a bold proclamation, a government official stated that the party had prevented the birth of 400 million people. Notably, in rural areas, some individuals were subjected to sterilization against their will. The year 1983 alone witnessed over 20 million sterilizations and 15 million abortions, underscoring the intensity of the policy's enforcement. Consequently, the children born in China during the 1980s and 1990s became the inaugural generation of only children. The Chinese coined them Shaohuandi, which translates to little emperors, a somewhat derogatory term for only children. This demographic shift also led to a skewed male population, with some resorting to gender-selective measures to avoid having a girl as their only child, including abortion, abandonment, or, tragically, even murder. Raised without the tempering influence of siblings, these only children, now numbering in the millions, find themselves going to great lengths to enhance their appeal to potential partners. Interestingly, this phenomenon has had a ripple effect on property prices. Owning an apartment is increasingly viewed as a prerequisite for marriage, driving up the demand for housing. While the one-child policy achieved its intended goal, it garnered widespread unpopularity. By 2010, the Chinese Communist Party acknowledged that it might have been too successful. The family planning policies had set a timer. A generation of unburdened workers without many kids. However, the impending retirement of these workers' parents posed a new challenge. The working population would soon be confronted with the predicament of having too many elderly individuals to care for and not enough young people to sustain the workforce. The unintended consequences were becoming apparent. Australian economist Ross Gunno succinctly captures a significant concern in China: the apprehension that the nation might age before it attains significant wealth. The challenge lies in the unavoidable reality that you cannot control the aging of a population, or at least you shouldn't attempt to. The Chinese Communist Party, however, faced the pressing question of when to lift the restrictions on having more than one child. To address this, they needed accurate and extensive data on the size of the population. Enter the census, a tool that could inform the government about the demographic landscape, guide social and political program development, and direct financial allocations. However, the authoritarian nature of the Chinese government has led to a culture of incentivized misinformation. Officials are motivated to exaggerate numbers, whether to secure more funding or boost their salaries. If you desire more than one child, the solution might be as simple as having two but keeping it under wraps. Fearing repercussions, some parents opted to keep additional children at home without informing the government. This culture of misinformation extends to various aspects, from concealing deaths to justify continuing policies. For family planning officials advocating the one-child policy, manipulating metrics becomes a means to sustain their stance, even if it contradicts the reality on the ground. The intricacies of this system reveal the challenges inherent in obtaining accurate data in an environment where incentives often lean towards deception. Due to various manipulations, some experts, such as Professor Yi Fujian, believe that the Chinese government was inflating its population by around 10%, effectively creating over 100 million imaginary people, mostly fictitious youngsters. In 2013, Chinese President Xi Jinping initiated the unwinding of the one-child policy. Initially, a new rule allowed couples to have a second child if either parent had grown up as an only child. Subsequently, this restriction was lifted altogether, permitting everyone to have a second child. However, a surprising trend emerged. Many millennials, being the most well-educated and pampered generation in Chinese history, showed a reluctance to embrace larger families. Professor Yu Fusion noted that people either didn't want more children or, even if they did, found themselves constrained by financial considerations. As one individual put it, maybe after 5 or 3 years, we can consider that, but from now on, I think the only one child is enough for us. The millennials, accustomed to being raised as little emperors, were hesitant to deviate from this norm. Financial constraints also played a significant role, with concerns about the affordability of larger living spaces being a common deterrent to expanding their families. Anticipating the end of the one-child policy, top family planning officials had envisioned a resurgence in 4-child families, expecting the problem to resolve itself. However, the reality was starkly different. When the one-child law was finally lifted, people did not rush to have 4 kids as projected. While there was a modest increase in the birth rate in 2016, it was short-lived, followed by a decline the next year. Contrary to expectations, the birth rate continued to plummet, aligning with Yu Fusion's earlier predictions. In a moment of urgency, the Chinese government not only lifted the ban on Yu Fusion's book, but also canceled his censure and invited him to tour the country, discussing his findings. The hope was that this might encourage people to have more children. However, contrary to their expectations, the situation did not improve. If anything, it worsened. As recently as 2019, the United Nations projected that China's population would keep growing, with the peak expected in the 2030s. However, this turned out to be inaccurate. In reality, the population peaked in 2022, according to Yu Fusion, who believes it might have peaked even earlier, in 2018. The consequence of this unexpected demographic shift is a shrinking population, sending ripples of concern through the economy, which had anticipated several more years of growth. The ramifications of this unanticipated decline are now impacting various sectors. Now, you might be wondering, okay, when are we going to get to the part about property, money, and economic crisis? Well, here's where it all ties together. Major property companies in China were busy constructing homes for the anticipated next generation of workers. China's property industry, renowned as the world's largest, was considered by Fitch Ratings as the most crucial sector globally. However, it operated like a Ponzi scheme, heavily reliant on a continuous influx of buyers to drive up property prices and sustain the industry's ability to pay off its mounting debts. The catch was that these real estate developments were often built for imaginary occupants, contributing to a surplus of vacant apartments. Simultaneously, real residents were grappling with the escalating cost of living. This imbalance has triggered a crash in the property market, with ramifications extending beyond China, reaching even countries like Australia. The connection lies in the construction of apartment buildings, reliant on steel, which in turn is produced from iron ore. As the Chinese property market faces a downturn, the demand for iron ore from regions like the Pilbara is dwindling. This ripple effect is impacting countries dependent on iron ore exports, causing a decline in prices. So, what does this mean for Australia, a nation heavily reliant on selling iron ore to China? Well, as China's demand for iron ore diminishes, the price is likely to continue its downward trend. The implications are substantial, and as the situation unfolds, it's safe to say that the outlook appears quite grim. Louise Liu from Oxford Economics paints a bleak picture, suggesting, unless we see a meaningful turnaround in the property sector, it's quite hard to even imagine a turnaround in consumer spending. The severity of the situation is echoed by Michael Avery from Rabobank, who expresses skepticism about a possible recovery. According to Avery, I don't think there is a way back. Population growth in China is over, and the debts that Chinese companies took on during the growth years are catching up with them. This confluence of factors, including a stagnant property sector and mounting debts, creates a challenging landscape. As apartment buildings are dismantled in China, there's a global audience anxiously watching, hoping that the economic repercussions do not extend to a collapse of China's economy as well. The interconnectedness of the global economy means that the effects are not limited to China, but have far-reaching implications for various regions and industries around the world. The unfolding scenario underscores the delicate balance of economic dynamics and the intricate connections that tie nations together in the modern economic landscape.